Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our TGIF and Product Owner episode this week with Jaques Smit. Hey Jaques, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Vasco.
So great product owners are people to admire and learn from, and we'll talk about that in a second. But before we go there, let's start with the opposite. What might have been potentially the worst product owner anti-pattern you've seen in your career, Jaques?
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I'm going to look at this from a contrast of like the good and the bad way of dealing with a bad situation. I saw two product owners on two different products at the same time working with the same ecosystem. And there was a flaw in the ecosystem where, to put it this way, I came in to help the one that was really having a hard time. And the reason I came in was all the stakeholders said, like, this person cannot be trusted. They're not doing what they're saying that they're going to do. There's like real big problems with this team. Everything is just wrong. I was like, okay, I'm going to come see what's happening. I don't know what's happening. I don't want to make any judgments up front. I'm just going to come see. And I sat down with this person, and he had a team of 26 that were working on his product, which was a really big team. And I was like, it's quite big. Like, this is already like a lot of lines of communication you're trying to manage. This is going to be really hard. Like, they're one big blob. You don't have any way of like breaking down the work, and like you don't have individual units that can kind of like take stuff and run with it. You have to manage all of these people and think for them. I said, okay, well, that's a problem, but that doesn't seem an insurmountable problem. It shouldn't be quite the level that you're experiencing at. It's 26 people is a lot, but it's not that much. We've seen worse, 60, 70 person teams. Then I started kind of mapping out, like I sat down with the product owner and we started mapping out where are all of these lines going. And I started realizing that there were also 46 stakeholders that had a direct opinion about everything the product owner did, and was talking to the team directly past the product owner and changing things that were in production as well. And so I mapped that out to be around 1,000 to 100 and something. I can't remember what the actual number was. Somewhere in the vicinity of 1,000 lines of communication that the product owner was being held responsible for. And obviously, they couldn't be on top of all of this stuff. Like, there were agreements being made that was outside of their purview to be able to actually like manage in any meaningful way. On top of that, they had a habit of saying yes to everyone. And when you say yes to everyone in such a complex web, things are going to come back to bite you because you cannot deliver everything. You need to be saying no to a much, much more than you're saying no to. And that's when I started realizing the team that was equal in size and was functioning well and actually like, delivering pretty decent stuff on a regular basis, we're facing the same complexity, but in a completely different way. And I was like, what's going on here? Why are these two individuals having such a different experience? Both of the product owners were disliked by the ecosystem.
For different reasons, I'm sure.
Yes. So the one was disliked because they kept saying they would do stuff and never did it. And the other one was disliked because they kept saying no to everybody by default. So the way that they essentially dealt with it is they just went and they chopped all those lines of communication off and said, I'm sorry, I'm not having any of this. If you want to talk to someone, you come talk to me. And I'm going to say no to you by default unless you can convince me otherwise. Now, it wasn't the ideal. Like, he took it a little too extreme, but it's the best that he could do with the situation that he had. And essentially, he became the shield for the team with all these like different demands that wanted to be thrown at the team, and absorbed them instead and kind of like made them a nice, clean, prioritized list that people could argue about and they could talk about. And if someone wants to have their thing on the list, they had to make a really good argument about why did it need to be at the top of this other thing. And if it couldn't meet a certain line, sorry, buddy, it's out. I'm not doing it. I'm not even going to beat around the bush. I'm not going to tell you that it might get done. It's just not getting done. If I think about it in 6 months again and I have time and it's priority, then I'll think about it again. So that was quite a challenge to then like bring over to the other team. The other product owner was really in a challenging situation because they're Their deadline was coming up. People were putting a lot of pressure on them, and we needed to do something to cut down the lines of communication. My first advice going in is like, okay, cut your team down to 6 people, get rid of everyone else, and let's start from there. And the feedback was like, nope, we can't do that. We have a deadline. We have so much work to do. There's all these things like that
and
are
of course,
behind.
because he had said yes to everyone.
Exactly. And so we said, okay, well, we can try help you to break the team down into smaller units. If you refuse to heed the advice, we'll try. We tried, and this interesting thing happened. So we have this idea of game jams, where we take a team that doesn't have anything to do, in this case, on that product, and we get them game jam. So they could do anything they want. It just had to be within the space of the game that they were working on. And we took the leaders, the core unit that kind of kept the thing together, and we went and we kind of worked with them to develop and train them and figure stuff out. And this magical thing happened, which was really like it still has ripple effects through the organization today. When you took all the leaders out of these like more junior staff, and you left the junior staff to their own devices to just do stuff, they all produced 10 times more work than they had been producing for all of the time before it. And most of it was really good and useful and helpful, actually made the product better. And that was because they were all broken down to little teams of 3, cross-disciplinary people, just kind of like figuring out how to do something cool. And they weren't worried about anything else. And that started kind of like lighting this light bulb, like, hey, what if we took all these 20-year veterans that are currently so overburdened with trying to manage this big team, and we just put them together in a single team and let them work without all of that overhead. And finally, it landed, and people gave in and they said, okay, you can do it. Like, cut the team down. Cut the team down to 5, and the productivity loss was 0. The team delivered exactly the same amount as the 26 people used to deliver. But the innovation went way up. And ultimately, they disproved the product and they decided to kind of like get away from it. But they couldn't come to that kind of conclusion until that point, because they were so inundated with work and with keeping people busy that they couldn't stop to actually ask themselves the question of like, is this product worth building? And so, I think that's just a lovely story about like the two differences.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also conveniently for us for this episode an example of what a great PO would do given a very difficult environment and context. But I wanted to explore this last part a little bit more, because if I understood you correctly, what you said was that over time they break the team down into smaller units of kind of cross-functional, so kind of almost self-sufficient, smaller teams that would then be delivering stuff to the product. And something surprising happened, which was that they finally figured out that the product, or the game in this case, was actually a non-starter, and they should just move on to another game. And you contrasted that with not being able to get to that conclusion earlier because they were overburdened, they were flooded with work. And I think that this contrast is so important and critical that it bears repeating and highlighting, that when we are busy, so busy with work that we don't have time to think, we are less productive and we are unable to think outside of the work that we need to do. And we're stuck in one or in single loop learning, right? We can get better at doing the work, but we can't think about why we're doing that work. And when we give more, I want to say more control, but also control not just in terms of the work that we do, but also in how we organize, so smaller teams, more focused, cross-functional, then we start to be able to think about why we're doing this work and eventually figure out that maybe we shouldn't, because it's not as good as we thought it was when we started, right? Is that how you saw it? Or how do you, when you look back, how do you understand in your own words this contrast between being flooded with work versus being able to think about why we're doing this work?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you said around like single, double, and triple loop learning. We have no hopes of getting to the point where we can challenge our assumptions. Never mind starting to realize how we're thinking that's creating those assumptions in the first place. And it kind of required this extreme pressure of a deadline looming and people being really upset, for them to be willing to take the drastic measures that needed to be taken in order to be able to take that pressure off. And I think often it's one of the reasons that people fall into the trap of thinking more people makes for more work. It's like more people make management more complex, requires more mind space to be able to manage the communication. And so they make it less likely that you can actually have the time to think. Yeah, sure, you have more QA capacity. Yes, sure, you have more production capacity. But more capacity spent on the wrong thing makes you more wrong, not more right. And that's like, Russell Ackoff's famous quote that I always bring up to teams. It's like, the more right you do the wrong thing, the more wrong you become. So if you don't have time to spend a day where you don't commit any code or do anything like on the product, just to stop and think about what you should be doing and why you should be doing it, you're probably falling into this trap.
Absolutely. And a trap it is, because once we are in it, we can't even see the outside of it, right? Like if we're always running after the deadline, always being given more work, we can't even think about why we're doing this work because there's no time, literally, right? So yeah. A great story, and also kind of an insightful, from a surprise perspective story. But something that we should always be mindful of is, are we exercising our double loop learning muscles or not? Because if not, then for sure anti-patterns like this will emerge. Jaques, we'll put the link to your latest book, The Eye of Winter, in the show notes so that people can go and check it out. I might want to do a bonus episode with you on the process of writing the book. That's something I'm interested in, as I write and help others write their books as well. But other than The Eye of the Winter, and we'll put the link on the show notes, where else can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, everyone can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty prominent on there. Jaques Smit is the add-on at the end of the LinkedIn address to find me. And Mindforge is a company I work with, one of the directors of that company. We support companies with transformation, do one-on-one and team coaching. And we also specialize in creative space because I have so much experience in game development. I like working with creative people. I have a lot of ability and skill in working with people in software development teams trying to come up with new products. And my colleagues are very similar to myself, coming from the same kind of like background. With our claim to fame is pretty much that we're professional coaches first and organizational change agents second, because we think about the people and how we help people change the way they think and their mindset, rather than focusing on the processes first and trying to get the processes right. We believe if we focus on the mindset and we support the people and we help them understand why they should change, that the change becomes much easier. And then I still work with Pickpock, who's pickpock.com if you want to check them out, game developer in Wellington, New Zealand. They're an awesome company with just some of the best people I've ever worked with in the industry. If you're interested in playing some mobile games, and we have some stuff on console as well, check us out.
Absolutely. We'll put the link to all of those in the show notes so that people can easily find it. Jaques, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Vasco.
One more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast is over, but there's a lot more we have to share. We have developed our own membership site where you find a community of active and engaged Scrum Masters. In this site, you get access to exclusive content and get to interact with us, your podcast hosts, as well as the best Scrum Masters in the world. So join us at scrummasterpodcast.com and keep this podcast free of advertising. See you next week for one more full week of Scrum Master tips and tricks. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.